Hi guys, and welcome back to another video here at 1000 PS. Today we're hitting you with a comparison test of the Honda CBR600RR and the Honda Fireblade, the 1000RR SP version. And yeah, today the question is, how much CBR do you actually need? Is it gonna be the Fireblade? Is it gonna be the 600? We're gonna find out, we're gonna let you know, so you better stay tuned. The huge battle of the Hondas, the CBR600RR and the Fireblade. When it comes down to the question, how much CBR do you actually need? I feel like personally it's a very easy answer. 600cc is really enough. It's really enough. I felt more comfortable on the bike. It was easier to handle, and also for me, when it comes down to like feeling safe on a bike, when I have too much respect, that also resembles fear a bit, that I have a different attitude. It's a different approach, and if you have that feeling of not being in control, you ride differently, and I feel like it's a little more unsafe. And for me, I felt way more settled with the 600cc. It wasn't boring at all. It was sporty. It was fun. And yeah, to me, that was a greater and like a more fun experience. So I definitely would say, also regarding that, the brakes are different, and the Fireblade has really aggressive and like intense, rough brakes that work perfectly fine and are great. But for me, it was too much. Yeah, it took more time to get used to it. And I feel like for riders that don't have as much experience, the 600cc are the better option.
Well, what can I say? First of all, the price difference is massive, and so is the horsepower gap. We are talking about around 120 horsepower, and the other one has roughly 220 horsepower. Yeah. What can you really say to that? Let's talk about the components. The brakes on both bikes are fantastic. I was really impressed by the brakes on the 600. I'm genuinely fascinated. I think that for the category of bike it's fitted to, it's just exceptionally good. At least that's my opinion. The quick shifters on both bikes are different. I want to make that clear straight away. They are not the same quick shifter, at least they don't feel the same, but both quick shifters work really well. On the 1000 Fireblade, the pedal is slightly angled inwards, whereas on the Fireblade it's a bit straighter. And so, I just wanted to point that out. On the 600, the quick shifter needs a bit more input, while on the 1000, it needs slightly less. The riding position is radical on both. I honestly wouldn't even know if one is that much more extreme than the other. But yeah, I think the 1000 does have a more aggressive riding position than the 600. Still, I think both riding positions suit the type of bike. Obviously, if we're talking about performance, if I had to comment on that, then I'd say the gearing on the 600 is quite long. That means on the one hand, it's probably a lot of fun on track with that long gearing. On the other hand, on the road, it's too long. On the road, you'll always be riding in first gear. And even in first, it could still do with a bit more punch. From my point of view, if it's purely about performance, then sure, the 1000 offers more power and more torque than the 600. But I have to say, in return, the 600 feels more agile and more nimble in the corners. I really had fun. And the suspension was so good that in the corners I felt pretty, well, let's say, obviously I'm not scraping knees out on the road, but I definitely felt confident enough to lean in a bit with the 600. The 1000 of course comes with the absolute top of the range suspension, so you can't really complain. But basically, if I had to answer the question, yeah, the screens I think are the same. We've got the same TFT display in both, more or less the same size. Not much difference there. And if I had to decide which one I'd take, the 600 or the 1000, the 1000, then I'd really have to weigh that up again based on my own priorities, based on the kind of roads I have around me and ride on, and of course based on the budget I've got, to decide whether to go for one or the other. I really like the CBR600, and I've got more respect for the 1000. Considering the bigger investment, I'd probably have to hold back a bit, because we're talking about a lot of money here.
How much CBR do you really need, especially when the Fireblade costs twice as much as the CBR600RR, actually even more than twice as much? We did the comparison just for fun, and since we had both bikes, well, why not? Martin, I'm more of a road rider, occasional track day kind of guy. I can't get the full potential out of these bikes. They're just way too much, especially I think for the road. I mean, take the Fireblade, second gear, 200 kilometers per hour. That's just insane. Luckily, the GoPro gave up on me at that moment. But what's your take on this comparison? CBR600RR versus Fireblade, riding bikes like this on the road. Do you think that still makes sense? Is that still relevant nowadays?
Yeah, it's definitely getting harder and harder to ride bikes like these on the road. But that doesn't mean you always have to push them to the limit. I can ride something like this in a relaxed way too, without constantly using all the power. What does make things a bit more difficult with these bikes though, is the ergonomics, especially with the Fireblade, which stands out even more than the CBR600 in that regard. If you try to cruise along a bit more casually and ride for longer periods, it does become quite uncomfortable. You really feel it in your hands, your wrists, because the riding position on the Fireblade is even more extreme and aggressive than on the CBR600. And that makes it quite exhausting to ride a bike like that in a more laid-back way on the road. That's something you've definitely got to acknowledge, yeah.
But like you already said, you can ride them on the road. I actually felt incredibly safe on the Fireblade simply because it's just so superior when it comes to the equipment, the electronics, and the suspension setup. I mean, I think the Fireblade is a really pleasant bike on the road, apart from the engine tuning, of course, just because all the components are so high-end that it really gives you a sense of security, like you're in very capable hands.
Absolutely. Especially on the Fireblade, you basically get all the electronics currently available on the market and at a really high level. The way the systems are tuned, the traction control, which you can break down into different areas like engine brake, wheelie control, traction control itself, throttle response. We've really got every possible adjustment parameter here to fine-tune the bike exactly how the rider wants it, and all of that with a really high level of precision. You have to say the whole thing is extremely optimized for the racetrack, and of course you benefit from that on the road as well. Because the stuff that works well on track, especially rider aids, obviously works brilliantly on the road too. And on the road, we usually don't even have the same level of grip as we do on a racetrack, which means we don't ride with the same lean angles. And so the system doesn't get pushed to its limits in the same way as it does on track. That's why these systems actually have it easier on the road and can deliver an even better overall impression. And that's definitely the case with the Fireblade. It's operating at the highest level you can find on the road. What complicates things a bit though is how the engines are set up. Both the 600 and the Fireblade are tuned in a very top-end focused way. That means they're really designed to deliver maximum performance at high revs, and that makes it tricky to ride them smoothly on the road. Starting with the 600, the low-end torque for relaxed road riding is just not really there. The engine is built for high revs. Below 8,000 or 9,000 revolutions, there's relatively little thrust, at least compared to the peak performance. You really need to rev it high. And that, especially on the road, becomes a bit of a hassle. And frankly, it's not all that in tune with the times anymore. You've also got to be a bit careful, because when you ride bikes like this in those high rev ranges, to people around you or someone living nearby, it always sounds extremely aggressive. Even if you're not revving it all the way, just riding in that range already sounds fast, loud, aggressive. And that, in today's world, makes it even harder for bikes like this to be accepted by the public. So you're kind of encouraged to stay in the mid or low revs, and that's where these bikes don't really perform. Even with the Fireblade, which at the top end puts out over 217 horsepower according to the spec sheet, you've got barely any drive at low revs up to around 5,000 or 6,000 revolutions. It's hard to believe if you've never ridden one. You'd think a 200 horsepower monster would pull no matter where you twist the throttle, but that's just not the case. I actually took the Fireblade onto a supermoto track just for fun, did a few laps, And because of the extremely long gearing, which is still an issue with the Fireblade, even though the gearing was shortened in the latest generation, we're still talking about first gear being good for something like 140 to 150 kilometers per hour. Completely ridiculous speeds. So the rider just doesn't have the chance to reach those revs where the power really kicks in. Even in first gear on a normal road, you're already in illegal territory. To reach those high rev zones, and I really noticed this on the kart track or supermoto track, I was basically only using first gear. Obviously, on the short straights, I managed to shift into second once or twice, but otherwise it was all first gear. And even coming out of tight corners, there just wasn't enough power. And that's with a bike that's supposed to have 217 horsepower. But that really highlights the issue with how these bikes are tuned and what that means for riding them on the road. We're dealing with so many situations on the road that you'd never encounter on a racetrack. Extremely tight corners, slow turns, needing to accelerate from low revs. That's just not where these bikes shine. Not even the Fireblade, despite having 217 horsepower at the top end. And that's why these days it's genuinely difficult to use bikes like this effectively on the road.
But if we look a bit further ahead, Martin, of course, anyone who buys a bike like this is going to take it on track as well. I actually find it really nice to see that the CBR600RR is now also up to modern standards in terms of electronics. I used to have a PC40 for many years, and that was still all pretty basic, ABS, and that was it. But when you get on the CBR600RR now, you've got engine brake control to adjust, traction control to adjust, and all sorts of customization options through the TFT display. On one hand, I think it's great to see that bikes like this have come so far electronically, but on the other hand, I do wonder, is that really necessary? Especially on something like a CBR600RR?
On the racetrack, it's definitely very useful for a lot of riders because it gives you that extra layer of safety. We're talking about operating in zones where you're really pushing the maximum performance. With the Fireblade and the CBR600RR, we're talking about 120 or 121 horsepower on paper, and that's already a level where I'd say it's not a bad thing for most riders to have a bit of support. On the road, it's a different story, but even there, lots of riders benefit. You might not always be using those high performance zones, those high revs, but you've got massive variation in road conditions. And I'm not even talking about cobbled streets, more like dirt, debris, or damp patches you come across. That's where these rider aids really come in handy. And nowadays, the precision of these systems is at such a high level that it makes them genuinely useful in everyday riding. In the past, those early generations of rider aids were often quite basic and they'd kick in at moments when you didn't want them to. So back then, the interference from those systems was often greater than the actual benefit. But now, thanks to the high-end sensors we've got on these bikes, accelerometers, lean angle sensors, and so on, all of that data is factored in. And that means the precision of the systems is now at such a high level that you really only benefit from them. So yes, it does make sense to have these aids, especially on more powerful bikes like the Fireblade. That said, it has also pushed costs up massively because unlike in the past, where manufacturers just focused on suspension, a bit of engine tuning, and the brakes, they now also have to develop all these electronic systems. And we're talking about very high-end sensors that constantly need to be improved. We're also talking about all the control algorithms. That's actually where the core know-how lies in these electronic rider aids. And those have to be adapted to each individual bike with its unique riding geometry. You get different brake and acceleration forces depending on the setup, and all of that has to be taken into account. Naturally, this pushes the costs up massively, just like we're seeing with the Fireblade right now, which is more or less already at double the price of the 600. And that's also because it takes things even further in terms of control quality and the sensors that are fitted. And that's ultimately what causes these price jumps, which in the end are paid by the customer. That's maybe one of the darker sides of this development.
And especially in the context of our comparison, I'm really looking forward to it, Martin. We've got a very sharp power delivery on both bikes. The performance is all way up high. But now both bikes come with pretty extensive electronics. So the question is, if you're mostly riding on the road, do you even need the Fireblade? I mean, with the CBR, you're getting it for half the price. So do you even need a Fireblade if you're not planning to ride on the track?
No, that really depends on what the rider is looking for in a bike. The Fireblade still offers a bit of thrust in the lower rev range, even if it's nothing close to what it delivers at high revs. but in a direct comparison, the Fireblade naturally gives you a bit more low-end performance than the 600 simply because of the bigger engine, and that does make normal road riding a bit more pleasant. What really speaks against the Fireblade, if we're talking purely about road use, is the riding position. It's much more comfortable on the CBR600. You're sitting a lot more relaxed because it's just a more upright position. Still sporty, of course, but way less extreme than on the Fireblade. Especially that first generation of the SC82, it was brutal. Super low clip-ons, a really tight knee angle, just totally uncomfortable. We even had to tone it down for the racetrack because even there, it was simply too radical and took way too much physical effort to handle the bike properly. And Honda has indeed toned that down a bit in the latest generation, but compared to the 600, it's still extremely aggressive and simply too tiring for regular road use. You really feel it in your wrists. On top of that, the clutch on the CBR600 is noticeably easier to operate. You can reach the clutch lever more comfortably just because the clip-on position is more relaxed. So overall, using the controls on the CBR600 is just that bit easier and more comfortable on the road than it is on the Fireblade. I'd say for those who still want a bit of low-end pull and have the budget for it, the Fireblade is hard to ignore. But for anyone who says, look, I don't necessarily need a full-on acceleration monster, I'm okay with the lack of low-end drive as long as I get a more relaxed riding position, and who also wants better value for money, then they're more likely to go for the CBR600, especially for road use.
That's a wrap. In the end, it all comes down to how fat your wallet is and what you actually want. And whatever you want, let us know down in the comments. But that's it from Martin and us here in the studio.
That's all we've got for you today, guys. Let us know if you have a preference, if you think the 600 is better or the Fireblade, which one of them you've tried before, you want to try, or a reason not to. Share with us, comment, like, subscribe, and I'm gonna see you very soon.